When Civ VII first released, I, like many, found the game frustrating and feeling like it was an unfinished product. Even with the release of tweaks and patches over recent months, I feel that developers still have a long way to go to making Civ VII a minimal viable product in the mind of many Civ fans. I want to be clear that when I say this, it is not because I think Civ VII is a bad game. There are many good things about it, and I can see many people enjoying the game just as it is. But for those of us who have been on their civilization journey for over 30 years, it pales in comparison to the games we fell in love with. For us, Civilization seemed to be a franchise that was always growing. Not that it got everything right all the time, but its world always felt open and expanding. Civilization VII has changed all that. Comments I have received that ring true are things like immersion breaking and a game that is on rails. Although Civ VII tries to give us a game that feels like traditional Civ, certain core mechanics have left some longtime Civ fans feeling shut out, and there's very little in the game that feels like a major improvement or step forward. Even small changes to the game seem like half-baked ideas inserted for no real reason. When Civ VII was first released, I started to look at some of the new ideas and felt a lot of them had real potential. There were some heavily hyped mechanics that I was very excited about, but that left me wanting more. One of those ideas was commanders. I made a video about how I thought they could be improved, and it basically bombed. It remains my worst performing video. Naturally, I had to look inward and ask myself, what did I get wrong? Not an easy thing to do, but I think I figured it out. The current state of Civ VII and the Civ franchise as a whole has become an us versus them war zone. Either you love the game and don't want to hear about how commanders could be improved because you think they are perfect just the way they are.
Everybody likes you. It's impossible not to like you. Impossible.
Or you have written Civ VII off as completely irredeemable.
Maybe some people don't like him. I can see that.
Don't get me wrong, I know that that's not everybody. I'm certain that there are plenty of folks who know that the game could be improved and who have great ideas. And the truth is, whether you love Civ VII or will never buy it, we are all on the same side. We all just want a great experience. So even though I might be setting myself up for ridicule by taking the time to make a video about something no one will ever watch or care about, I'm going to do like the Civ developers and double down on my ideas. After all, it's only through thoughtful discussion that we really make any progress. Welcome to Civilization Stories, where we explore alternatives to history through the lens of the world's most addictive video game. Before I really get going here, I want to first just state that although I believe that Civ VII has some deep and glaring flaws in its philosophy and how they relate to their core mechanics, anytime I share ideas about ways to improve the game, I will try to do so within the framework of the game's existing mechanics. What I mean is, I won't try to offer an idea that requires developers to retcon what they built the game on. Anytime I make a suggestion, it is in the spirit of building on what already exists. I also want to point Civ fans to a great video by Herson called What Civ VII Doesn't Understand About Player Interaction. I will leave a link to that video in the description. Why I think every Civ lover and Firaxis developer should check out that video is because Herson articulates a very important element of the psychology of gaming that is absent in Civ VII and that has alienated longtime fans of the game. To briefly summarize and explain why his video is important to this conversation is he talks about an idea in gaming as a theory that he calls interaction. Although Herson specializes in the Civ multiplayer experience, this idea of interaction can apply to the single-player experience as well. I think interaction is a word that every Civ player and every gamer should learn the meaning of and add to their vocabulary. I don't want to entirely restate his point, but to paraphrase Herson and give my audience here a brief summary, interaction in video gaming is when the decisions of opponents, whether human or AI, affect the decisions of you, the player. They are actions taken in the game that force one to ask themselves, not, okay, what's next, an on-rails consideration, but what should I do to respond, an interactive consideration. Keeping this idea of interaction in mind, what I want to talk about today is the Migrant unit in Civ VII. These guys have popped up a few times, rather irregularly, in some of my games. Each time, I really had no idea how they got there or what I should do with them. Eventually, I just added them to a settlement without fully considering my options or the ramifications of my choice. I never felt its effects, and the choice I made was of no consequence. My game was largely the same before the Migrant as after the Migrant. Migrants are civilian units that you can use to occupy a rural tile in one of your settlements. They are essentially a transferable growth event. They pop up through narrative events, if you use Harriet Tubman's Lantern Memento, or if you build the Statue of Liberty. From what I can tell, if one of your settlements is large enough, experiences a growth event, and yet there is no more room for growth, the settlement will spawn a migrant. Don't quote me on this last point. Either way, migrants are kind of rare. I've played whole games and never seen one. They don't do much, and if they disappear tomorrow, the game would mostly be the same. But do I think they should just get rid of the migrant unit? No. I see here the seed of a potentially really cool mechanic that could highlight player interaction, force players to make deeper and more thoughtful consideration of how to play alongside their opponents, as well as directly address some of the stated goals developers had for the game, specifically rubber banding. As someone who's traveled extensively, one of the things that makes visiting a new country so exciting is not just connecting with its locals, but with its minorities. As a Canadian, so many of us are part of some kind of diaspora. The city of Vancouver, where I live, has vibrant and passionate communities of Persians, Indians, Greeks, Chinese, Koreans, and Japanese. Montreal, where I grew up, has its own communities of Italians, Caribbeans, North Africans, and Lebanese. Every city in Canada is a cultural melting pot thanks to migration. Considering the loss of the loyalty mechanic, I think there is potential in the migrant unit to deepen the complexity of how cultural borders influence players' interaction in the game. What if migrant units, instead of being tied to narrative events, were something cities could produce? And instead of adding them to one's own cities, players could use them in rival cities to create diaspora forever connected to one's own civilization. Although I have conceived of robust and complex ways as to how migrant units can work within the context of Civ VII, in order to avoid getting way ahead of myself and creating a multitude of new mechanics for the game, I will attempt to break down what I mean here in the most simple ways. But let's just say that aside from building your empire, one of your parallel objectives could be to create a robust diaspora. Think of it as a way of expanding into your rival's territory without declaring war. So how would it work? Imagine I have a high population in one of my cities. I could create a migrant. For this example, let's imagine that there is a substantial cost associated with migration. So either they require a considerable amount of production to build or maybe cost a population. In fact, building migrants could be seen as a population control mechanism so the size of one's cities doesn't rage out of control, leading to unhappiness or pollution, mechanics that we saw in older Civ games when cities grew too large. Once players have built a migrant unit, instead of adding it to their own cities, they add them to their rival cities, thereby building their diaspora. Doing so would have two effects. Yes, it would add a population, rural or specialist, to your rival's target city, and they would benefit from that. But depending on how you decide to use your migrant, it could also steal yields from the settlement and send those yields back to your civilization. The possibilities for game interaction are almost endless. Let's consider a few, and let's build from the most simple to the most complex. Players could consider to use their migrant on a high-yield rural tile, perhaps tiles adjacent to a wonder, where the food goes to the rival city, but other yields like happiness, gold, and culture are funneled into the player's empire. Players could use their migrant on a high-yield urban tile. Perhaps the production goes to the rival's city, but also costs the rival some of its culture and science, while again funneling gold and influence into the player's empire. Multiple migrants can be sent to rival cities, whereby rival cities become complex melting pots that have an affinity for your civilization. Though controlled by a rival, they can consider themselves largely part of your civilization, making them more or less willing to be seated in peace deals, have shorter periods of rebellion should they be conquered, or something to that effect. A whole slew of policy cards can be conceived around this concept of diaspora, like hindering or improving relations. An example of a diaspora-related policy card might be something like diplomatic endeavors cost 50% less influence points with civilizations where your diaspora is more than 10 citizens, or rival sanctions cost plus 100% more influence points with civilizations with whom you have X many diaspora points, and so on. Perhaps having trade routes to certain settlements cuts the cost or doubles the effect of sending a migrant there. Ditto if the border of the rival cities touch. There could be numerous mechanics or policies around either protecting minorities or rival diasporas or limiting their impact. Decisions revolving around how players choose to interact with migrants and diasporas can increase or dampen their impact on empire-wide and or city yields and affect relationships with rival leaders. Although the casus belli mechanic no longer exists, the treatment by a rival of one's diaspora could give players a justifiable pretext for war and increase war support. The effects of the Statue of Liberty could be adjusted so that instead of supplying 4 migrants, i.e. for growth events, WP, perhaps it alters your relationship with migrants, whereby it passes double yields of migrants to rival civilizations, making other players want to send migrants to your cities, while simultaneously providing the equivalent yields to the city with the Statue of Liberty, thereby also directly benefiting the player who built the wonder. This would also be a far more accurate reflection of the role the Statue of Liberty has played, or symbol that it represents, in history. The depth and complexity for in-game interaction here is practically endless. Questions that players will be forced to now ask themselves while playing will include, are rivals migrating to my cities? If yes, why? Are they doing so to improve their empires or hurt mine? Are players migrating to my cities because my cities are desirable? Are rival players' cities desirable enough for me to consider sending migrants to their cities? Will my empire benefit more from building from within, or moving my people outside of my borders and into those of my rivals? What this kind of mechanic could do for rubber banding beyond crises would also be so much more in line with the spirit of Civ games and help to take them off of its rails, because it would be driven by player decisions and not something that kicks in arbitrarily when 70% of the age has elapsed. If a rival's yields are getting insanely high, you could even have a diplomatic endeavor that persuades other players to migrate to the towns and cities of the target to limit their snowballing effect. It could be a kind of passive warfare without firing a shot or declaring war. Anyway, these are just a few ideas from a crazy guy who loves playing Civ and sees all of the untapped potential in many of the new ideas in Civ 7. Forever the optimist, I do see a fun game somewhere in Civ 7, even if, at the moment, and without trying to lay blame, it falls so short of what it could be. Listen, I know I'm crazy. My love and passion for Civ games drives that insanity. But tell me what you think. Are migrants perfect the way they are in Civ 7? What interesting things have you been able to do in Civ 7 using migrants? Do you think there are ways for the game to grow and include the migrant unit in that growth? Let me know down in the comments, and don't forget to like and subscribe if you haven't done so already. And as always, remember to keep playing and making your own civilization stories, your own amazing path through history, and I'll see you next time.